bitter criticism reading I don't know what we are going to read. Maybe from a long time ago, economy. Al Jazeera special economy. Can Putin sway Trump with economic offers in Alaska? This is a pretty political economic subject. And says, explainer, can Putin sway Trump with economic offers in Alaska? There's a photograph. A demonstrator holds a banner depicting a playing card with portraits of Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump. Here we go, explainer. Can Putin sway Trump with economic offers in Alaska? Economic offers. This headline is interesting to me because I didn't know the Russian economic power. So here we go. Putin will hope to appeal to Trump's business instincts by discussing economic ties alongside the future of Ukraine. By Al Jazeera staff, updated 6 hours ago, 15 August 2025. United States President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are set to meet in Anchorage, Alaska on Friday in a bid to try and end Russia's 3-year assault on Ukraine. In the run-up to the meeting, Trump said that he believes Putin is ready to agree to a ceasefire, but his suggestion that Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky could, quote-unquote, divvy things up has alarmed observers in Kiev. For their part, remarks from top Russian officials suggest that Moscow has tried to water down discussions about the war by linking them with other bilateral issues, particularly restoring economic ties with the US. On Thursday, Putin sat down with top officials and the Kremlin to discuss the Alaska meeting. He said that he believed the US was making quote-unquote sincere efforts to stop the fighting, end the crisis, and reach agreements on interest to all parties involved in this conflict. Earlier on Thursday, Yuri Ushakov, one of Putin's top foreign policy aides, told reporters about Russia's preparations for the talks. He said it was, quote, obvious to everyone that the central topic will be the settlement of the Ukraine crisis. Quote, an exchange of views is expected to the further development of bilateral cooperation, including in the trade and the economic sphere. End quote. He said, pointing out that, quote, I would like to know that this cooperation has a huge and unfortunately untapped potential. Ushakov also announced that in addition to Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Russia's delegation in Alaska will also include the country's Finance Minister Anton Silvanov, and Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's envoy on foreign investment and economic cooperation. The inclusion of Silvanov and Dmitriev is another sign that the Kremlin hoped to discuss economic matters at the summit. What does Russia-US trade look like? In 2021, before Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, total trade between Russia and the US amounted to $36.1 billion. This included $6.4 billion in US exports to Russia and $29.7 billion in US imports from Russia, amounting to a US trade deficit of $23.3 billion. For context, Russia was America's 30th largest trade partner in 2021. Since then, after numerous rounds of American sanctions, trade between Russia and the US has fallen roughly 90%. Incidentally, Russia's overall trade balance leaving the US declined significantly following its decision to invade Ukraine from 2022 to 2023. Its international balance of payments fell by a whopping 70% to just $86.3 billion. But back in 2021, Russia's trade surplus with the US was concentrated almost exclusively in commodities. Oil, minerals, and base metals like iron and steel made up roughly 75% of Russia's exports. Meanwhile, US exports to Russia were concentrated in manufactured goods. Were Russia exports to the US vital? Were Russian exports to the US vital? The short answer is no. By the time Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the US, whose energy sector was transformed by hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling in the early 2000s, was already the world's largest oil producer at 11.9 million barrels of oil per day. One area where Russia did hold limit significance was in certain types of energy products. Russia supplies certain grades of crude oil, notably Urals, as well as refined products like vacuum gas oil, VGO, residual fuel oil, and naphtha. Russian VGO was especially important for making gasoline and diesel products in US refineries, which lack enough domestic feedstocks with the optimal chemical and physical properties. Elsewhere, the US continues to import limited quantities of uranium hexafluoride, a chemical important in US processing from Russia. Some US utility companies still have supply contracts with Russia, which accounted for about 1/3 of America's enriched uranium needs when war broke out. As with energy products, however, American firms exposed to Russian uranium supplies have readjusted their supply chain in response to sanctions. What's more, US companies like X Energy and Orano have invested heavily in domestic production in recent years. Does Russia have any other leverage? In the wake of sanctions after February 2022, most Russian commodity shipments were rerouted from Western countries to China at discounted prices, including for energy products and uranium. Indeed, trade between China and Russia has grown in parallel with sanctions on Russia. A common border, shared geopolitical perspectives, and joint opposition to the US have deepened bilateral sanctions. Russia-China trade saw annual growth of nearly 30% in both 2022 and 2023, when it hit $240.1 billion, according to the Center for European Policy Analysis. In 2024, Russia climbed to 7th place among China's trading partners, up from 13th place in 2020. During that time, China has supplied Russia with more high-end products, like advanced electronics and industrial machinery, while Moscow has solidified its position as a top supplier of oil and gas to Beijing. What's more, the two countries conduct regular naval exercises and strategic bomber patrols together. The US has consistently expressed concerns over joint military drills and views the China-Russia alignment as a threat to its global leadership role. Putin will be aware of these dynamics heading into Friday's meeting. What else could Putin offer Trump? In March, Putin's investment envoy Kirill Dmitriev claimed that Russia and the US had started talks on rare earth metals projects in Russia, and that some American companies had already expressed an interest in them. Quote, rare earth metals are an important area for cooperation, and of course, we have begun discussions on various rare earth metals and other projects in Russia. Dmitriev told the Izvestia newspaper. China almost total global control over the production of critical minerals. Used it in everything from defense equipment to consumer electronics. Has focused Washington's attention on developing its own supplies. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates Russia's reserves of rare earth metals as 3.8 million tons, but Moscow has far higher estimates. According to the new Natural Resources Ministry, Russia has reserves of 15 rare earth metals, totaling 28.7 million tons as of January 2023. But even accounting for the margin of error hanging over Russia's potential rare earth supplies, it will still only account for a tiny fraction of global stockpiles. As such, the US has been pursuing minerals for security deals with the Democratic Republic of Congo and Ukraine in recent months, in an effort to wrest control of the global supply chain away from China. It may try and do the same with Russia. Sounds hard to achieve it. What does Russia want from these meetings? Since Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Western countries have imposed 21,622 sanctions on Russia, mostly against individuals. Key sanctions on Moscow include import bans on Russian oil, a price cap on Russian fuel, and the freezing of Russian central bank assets held in European financial institutions. But on July 14, Trump threatened to impose so-called secondary sanctions that, if carried out, will mark a notable shift. Since then, he has targeted India, the second bigger buyer of Russian oil, by doubling a 25% tariff on its goods to 50% as a penalty for that trade with Moscow. So far, Trump has not imposed similar secondary tariffs on China, the largest consumer of Russian oil. But he has suggested that Beijing could face such tariffs in the future, as the US tries to pressure countries to stop buying Russian crude, and thereby corner Putin into accepting a ceasefire. Members of Trump's administration have also indicated that if the Trump-Putin talks in Alaska don't go well, the tariffs on India could be increased further. Meanwhile, lawmakers from both US political parties are pushing for a bill, the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, that will also target countries buying Russian oil and gas. The bill will give Trump the authority to impose 500% tariffs on any country that helps Russia. US senators are reportedly waiting on Trump's okay to move the bill forward. In Alaska, Putin is expected to demand that Western sanctions on Russia be eased in exchange for Moscow agreeing to any peace deal. And that was the first one. A lot of details, but I thought Russia didn't care about US sanctions. The second says, Air Canada has cancelled flights as a strike looms. Here's what it means. There's another one. US governor in talks to take stake in Intel report. Ford, quote unquote, going to be good for 90 years. Trump defends the record on Social Security. Now, interesting. U.S. Supreme Court declines to pass new Mississippi social media law. Women with AI boyfriend mourn lost love effect after cold ChatGPT upgrade. Women with AI boyfriends. That's interesting, but it's not about. Oh, there's a news about Brazil. Brazil plans aid packages for businesses impacted by Trump tariffs. Interesting. I'm going to read a very specific subject about Brazil. And says, and there's a photograph. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva announced the plan, which will take effect immediately on Wednesday. Economy. Brazil plans aid packages for businesses impacted by Trump tariffs. The plan, called Sovereign Brazil, will include credit for businesses that rely on exports. The Brazilian government has unveiled a plan to support local exporters impacted by the 50% tariff imposed by the United States. Officials announced that has been dubbed, quote unquote, Sovereign Brazil, a credit lifeline of 30 billion reais, which is $5.5 billion. 30 billion to 5.5 on Wednesday. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva described the plan, which includes a bill to be sent to Congress as a first step to help local exporters. Congressional leaders attend Wednesday's ceremony, a first in months, in a sign of growing political support for the leftist leader in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. And there's a video. Brazil's president urges BRICS unity after Trump's tariffs hit China, India, and South America, while Russia remains exempt. Other measures announced by the Brazilian government include postponing tax charges from companies affected by U.S. tariffs, providing 5 billion reais, which is 5 million is almost $1 million or 1,000, something like that, in tax credit to small and medium-sized companies. It was 926,000, 5 billion reais in tax credits to small and medium-sized companies. There's a lot of money until the end of 2026, and expanding access to insurance against cancel orders. The plan also incentivizes public purchases of items that could not be exported to the US. The measures take effect immediately, but will only stay in place for four months unless congressional leaders act. Quote, "We cannot be scared, nervous, and anxious when there is a crisis. A crisis is for us to create new things," President Lula said. Quote, "In this case, what is unpleasant is that the reasons given to impose sanctions against Brazil do not exist," end quote. The tariffs have drastically weighed on sectors across the South American nation, including the beef industry. In July, when Trump first announced the plan, Robert Perosa, president of industry trade group Brazilian Beef Exporters Association, ABIEC, said that the tariffs will make it, quote-unquote, economically unfeasible to continue to export to the U.S. market. Trump has directly tied the 50% tariff on many imported Brazilian goods to the judicial situation of his embattled ally, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is currently under house arrest. There's another video. What will a conviction for former President Jair Bolsonaro mean for Brazil? In late July, the White House said that the order to impose this rate of tariffs is because of, quote, "the government of Brazil's politically motivated persecution, intimidation, harassment, censorship, and prosecution of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and thousands of his supporters are serious human rights abuses that have undermined the rule of law in Brazil." But let me tell you this, there was never, Brazil is not the Pacific Ocean, you know. Brazil is not that Pacific. The former Brazilian leader is accused of trying to facilitate a coup after losing the election in 2022. Yeah, what can I say from Rui Costa Pimenta, from the Hard Workers Party, the PCO, is that Brazil, Bolsonaro, it has half of the voters. Bolsonaro has half of the intentions of vote, so it's not that easy, you know. Brazilian situation is not that easy.